I'd like to know, just so we make it really clear to people, because I think when you hear this, it is really shocking.
Right.
That you can be an American citizen or of any place.
Mm-hmm.
And if you commit a crime, such as rape, inside a reservation, you cannot be charged by the Native American justice, the courts, the police. And so is it, in fact, Anita and Jenny, kind of like, I mean, people know this, having spent some time on reservations in different states. People obviously know what you can do on a reservation and what you can't do. I'm going to use a very ugly term, but is it a kind of hunting season? Because these men know that they can literally get away with murder,
right,
because they're non-native.
I think vulnerability plays a big role in predatory behavior on tribal lands. We certainly saw that in the Bakken fields in North Dakota, where I don't think a lot of people realize this, but they had to establish an FBI agency there because violent crimes had surged so highly, and many of those violent crimes were on Native women. And it had been the first bureau that the FBI had opened in like over a decade. So yeah, I think that vulnerability does play a huge role. But I would also say that there have been strides in responding to violence in tribal communities. The Violence Against Women Act squarely addresses what the Major Crimes Act hadn't done for tribes, which is managing their own justice affairs. And you can't really look at that story without looking at how tribes had always been managing their own justices. And it's in part because of the federal government that has done this and broken that system. And so there's been a steady pace for tribes to beef up their court systems and to allow for the prosecution of non-native offenders on their tribal lands. But that is imperfect as well because it just limits non-native offenders. And, it is a very sensitive topic, but predators are not, exclusive of race.
Thank you so much for bringing that up, Jenny, because I know that I was shocked by just like the legal issues around this.
Right.
But you're right. We cannot forget about the fact that some of this oftentimes is coming from within our own community.
Right.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's a sensitive topic to talk about because, right, I mean, especially if you're coming from tribal community, it's one that hasn't healed. And I don't know, I think that cycle of healing is going to happen for a long, long time.
Right.
And it's certainly not lost on our Indigenous communities. It's one that I think our men are really realizing, the leadership of our men are really realizing that. I think if we're going to really take a stern look at this issue, it has to come from within.
I'd like to add, too, that this is an issue that extends well beyond tribal lands as well. And the rates of conviction or, rates of justice, whatever you want to call it, are abysmal off of reservations, too. So, for example, the Urban Indian Health Institute just released a report. They studied sexual violence among urban Native women in Seattle. They found 94% of the survey participants had experienced sexual violence, and only 8% had seen their perpetrator convicted.
Wow.
And so even in an urban environment, we're seeing that law enforcement are not handling these cases properly, not following up as they should, and communicating to Native women that this kind of violence is okay. And that shows perpetrators as well. One of the things that I like to remind people is that we've had generations of people grow up on Tiger Lily, Pocahontas. Now we have Twilight, where the only Native woman is a domestic violence victim who doesn't have any lines. Or recently Hostels came out, and the Native women also don't have any lines and are rape victims. When that's the only way that you ever see Native women, and you don't see anyone ever be held accountable for that violence, it's easy to see that, to see us as objects rather than human beings, regardless of where we are.